Hi everyone, it is Andrew Wall here. Thank you for joining me. We've got a few minutes, about another 5 minutes to go before we kick off. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to join in the chat and share your messages in the chat panel. So you can see we've got a couple participants already. Planet for IT, I don't know if that's Nadine and Banjeet. Welcome to the call. Hopefully we'll give you guys some great value adds today. We've got some interesting new tools that we're going to share with everyone today. Let me just maybe pop up our screen here so that we can get everything rolling. So this, okay. Hopefully you guys are seeing our screen. If you're not, please let me know. Let's see our chat, see if anyone's having any problems. Hopefully audio is coming through. If audio is not coming through well, please do let me know, just so that we can make sure that this session goes off without a hitch. So we've got the screen up. While we wait for everyone else, maybe what I'll do is I will share with you guys some of the new things that we've got going on. So this is our new assessment tool for employee versus independent contractor. We'll be talking about this briefly later today. This is an example of what the classification looks like, and of course, it doesn't want to come up right now, does it? It's always the way in the middle of a presentation. Let's just try going back, because I was in it a minute ago. So this is an example of our tax foresight. I was hoping to show you guys the employment foresight before we kick off. We've got just a minute to go before we actually launch. And this tool is really quite cool because of the way it works, its results. So this works for both our tax foresight and our employment foresight. So it gives you an assessment of independent contractor versus employee, gives an explanation, lists similar cases and references. So it is a very, very powerful tool. We are making this available to all of our independent contractors that work through us, as well as any of the agencies that need any assistance. We're definitely happy to work with them. Let's see if I can find the saved classifications. And of course, there's no saved classifications. And I don't really want to go through a whole assessment right now. And this is basically what the assessment tool looks like. Mirrors our form, and then you get a nice result just like the other one. But I think we're probably ready to kick off. I'm going to pop that up to full screen. I'm just going to also see if anyone is chatting. Okay, no comments on the chat, so I am going to assume that audio is good here. And let's get that green screen into a better frame. So if anyone does have any questions, please, again, post them into the chat. Again, my name is Andrew Wall, and I'm from CPA4IT, which is Chartered Professional Accountants for Independent Consultants. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about who we are. Then we're going to talk a little bit about employee versus contractor. We'll talk again about personal service business risk, and then we'll look specifically at Bill 148 and the new issues that that brings to the table. And then we're going to talk to you guys about how you can minimize risk, whether you're an independent contractor or an agency, to help protect against this threat of independent contractors being assessed as employees. So a little bit about who we are. Chartered Professional Accountants has been in business. It's a multi-generational practice started by my father as Wall & Associates back in 1984. We've been specializing in IT consultants for almost that entire period. We do service some other niches, all service-based professionals, but 90% of our clients are independent contractors. We are also one of the few ISO 9001 registered firms. For those of you not familiar with ISO, ISO is a system to ensure that we have processes and procedures, that we follow those processes and procedures, and that those processes and procedures are continually updated as we strive for constant, never-ending improvement. We are also a member of the National Association of Computer Consulting Businesses, who has been very active on this issue of employee versus independent contractor. They've done a lot of work defending independent contractor cases when there was the special project that went on through CRA to reassess. They've also done a lot of work around Bill 148, working with law firms like Hicks Worley to develop their own sample survey to help assess whether people are employees versus independent contractors. A lot of this new stuff out of Bill 148 does still very much relate to the 4 factors of control that were set out in tax law, primarily around the Weeby-Dorr and SAGAS cases. Of course, there is a difference between tax law and employment law, and it is important to note that I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. You know, we're giving you our best insights and perspectives from the information that we've been able to gather from the lawyers that we've worked with, from the tools that we have, as well as the experience that we've had through the organization with NACCB. So like I say, hopefully this information will be useful to you. If you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat panel or follow up with us directly after the session. So a little bit about myself. My name is Andrew Wall. I am a CPA CMA. I worked with my father, I guess, starting back in 1999 when I helped work with him on one of his first software applications for doing online bookkeeping and accounting. We are very active in social and encourage everyone to connect with us there to continue this conversation. You can find me on Twitter at WallCPA. You can also find me on LinkedIn as the Small Business Accountant. And some of the other awards and recognition that we've had is we have been ranked as top 50 cloud accountants in North America. Cloud accounting is very much a passion for me. That's not the topic of today's session, but if anyone wants to know more about what cloud accounting is and how it can save independent contractors time and money, I'd be happy to have that conversation anytime. We've also won a few other awards recently, being recognized as, right now we're number 3 on the top 100 accounting influencers list by Avalara. We were also recognized just a few weeks ago out in Calgary as one of the top 50 bookkeeping, or sorry, top 10 bookkeeping influencers in Canada. So we stay very active, very engaged with the community to know and understand what's happening in technology. So a little bit about why contractors do choose to work with us, and I apologize for those of you who are already familiar with this. This might be old news. But for those of you that are new to the call, the reason that independent contractors tend to work with us is because we have a turnkey solution. What I mean by that is we offer a full suite of solutions, all the way from incorporation and setting up your business for the very first time and getting registered with GST, HST, through personal tax and corporate tax. And that makes it really easy for you guys to get those tax issues resolved, because I know no one likes dealing with tax, and we do our best to make it easy and painless. We also have a number of relationships with lawyers, insurance providers, financial advisors, so that we can act as the quarterback of your financial career. One of the other things that we do that is a little bit unique is we offer a benchmarking analysis. We are and have always been big believers in technology, and we were probably the first to do any form of benchmarking to compare our clients' financial information against average and medians in our database. This is a very effective tool to be able to understand if you are at risk, you have expense categories that are above the average that might warrant attention from CRA. This helps us to identify those situations beforehand to make sure that we can defend anything that might be overly aggressive. Because if you are aggressive, it doesn't mean that you're not entitled to it. It just means that we better make sure that we've got the documentation in place to be able to keep those deductions. On the flip side of that, when many people come from full-time employment, they may not be aware of all the things that they can deduct as an independent contractor. So our benchmarking analysis will help identify those situations where independent contractors have underreported expenses compared to the average and the median. That helps us to ask a few quick questions to help pinpoint expenses that you may have incurred and didn't realize were deductible, so we can help maximize that. And the reason that that is important is because every dollar that you deduct as an expense is a dollar that you don't pay tax on. Again, this isn't going to be a session on the tax advantages of independent contracting. Again, happy to share those with anyone who has questions. There are a lot of benefits and a lot of different structures that can be set up. One of the other things that we do offer that's a little bit unique is our representation protection. And in fact, for anyone who is on any of our prepayment plans, they get the audit representation protection for free. And how that audit representation protection works is if you're ever audited by CRA, we as our organization will represent you up until the third and final stages of appeals with CRA, which is as far as we can go as a chartered accountant. Beyond that, you do have 3 additional levels of appeals, which is Tax Court of Canada, Federal Court of Appeals, and even Supreme Court of Canada. Of course, if you're going to be going to that level, you're going to have a significant issue, maybe something around personal service corporation or a new complex tax maneuver that other people haven't thought of. As I've said before, we've been very effective with our cases at PSB up through the appeals processes. We have a lot of information that we're going to share with you guys today about how we actually represent and protect our independent contractors from this risk. And in the event that you do actually need to go to tax court, we again have relationships with some of the lawyers who have worked very diligently through NACCB to help protect and defend the independent contracting community. So with that out of the way, maybe we can start talking a little bit about employee versus independent contractor. There is a guide on the CRA's website. It's called Guide RC 4110. It differentiates between employee versus independent contractor. It talks about control, tools and equipment, subcontracting work, financial risk, responsibility for investment, opportunity for profit. This is a very useful guide. However, big caveat here, recognize that this is a guide used by CRA. And I think one of the most important things to know and understand when it comes to employee versus independent contractor, whether you're talking employment law or tax law, it's not CRA or an employment standards inspector that makes the determination. They may make an assessment, but ultimately the decision as to whether you are an employee or an independent contractor is made by a judge. Now, hopefully you're able to resolve that issue with the inspector or the agent to ensure that they recognize you as an independent contractor well before this ever needs to go to tax court. And that's one of the areas that we do our best to help resolve those issues as early as possible. And the best thing you can do is add some preventative measures so that you're never being challenged by CRA or employment standards. As I said before, this is a useful document for understanding CRA's perspective, but it is a guide written by CRA, and CRA has one perspective. You and your accountant and your lawyer may have another perspective. Hopefully those two perspectives align. If they don't, it's up to a judge to make the determination as to who is correct. So this is, like I say, useful, but keep it in perspective that this is a CRA guide. The other thing I like to talk about is what I call the secret CPP and EI information bulletin. It's not a secret, it's published on the internet. We've got a link down here in the thing, and let me even see if I can share this. No. I'll try and share it in the chat panel later today before we wrap up, so you have access to that link. This is a link that's specific to information technology consultants. And it, like the guide, the employee versus independent contractor guide that we mentioned earlier, it does have facts that can be considered neutral and indicators that a worker is an employee. First of all, I'd just like to point out that even the way it frames the conversation is a little bit biased, because saying you have facts that are neutral, basically not saying whether you're an employee or an independent contractor, or factors that indicate that you are an employee, is inherently biased. There should be factors that say you're an employer and factors that say you're an independent contractor. They won't actually say any factors that say you are an independent contractor. They only point out to factors that are neutral. The important thing about this guide is it went into some specific things around the independent contracting community in information technology, and recognized that some of the standard rules that CRA has been using in the past, which are very applicable in other industries, are definitely not as applicable in the information technology world, where, for example, people have very restrictive rules for the purposes of security around bringing your own devices and those types of things. And they have recognized that the level of control that would be required in an information technology environment is different from that of, say, a painter or an electrician or a plumber. So that's the good news. The bad news on this is that you still really have to be careful in understanding the language that you use. We've got a couple points here that for the average layman might seem to be very similar. To me, I recognize that they are actually very different points. One, as a factor that's considered neutral, they say, for security reasons and because the nature of the work makes this necessary, the IT consultant must provide their services at the payer's place of business. So that's great that just because you're working at your end client for most of the term of the contract, they can say that that's neutral, whereas in previous areas, they might have considered that to be a factor where you're an employee. Now, further down in this document, they do say that one of the indicators that a worker is an employee is that it requires, that the employer requires the IT consultant to provide services at the payer's place of business to allow the payer to monitor and provide direction as to how the work is done. And I think the key here is really understanding how important language is. And it's really this key area where it says to allow the payer to monitor, provide direction as to how the work is done. So one of the big things that case law, CRA, and everyone looks at is the amount of control that is exerted over the independent contractor. And as an independent contractor, your payer is allowed to exert control over the outcome, but they're not allowed to exert control over the process. Sometimes it's difficult for people to understand what I mean by that. So I always use the analogy of a painter. So if you hire a painter to come into your house, you would tell him what colors you wanted, what rooms you wanted painted, whether you wanted baseboards painted, whether you wanted the ceiling painted, et cetera, et cetera. So you would determine the outcome, but you certainly wouldn't tell him whether he's going to cut the lines with a brush or whether he's going to tape the lines or how he's going to actually paint the room. And that's the difference of controlling the outcome versus controlling the process. And I think the other thing, while we're on this topic of painters, another analogy I often talk about is following rules and procedures of your end client. Because one of the big questions CRA may ask and has asked in some of the surveys they've done is, do you abide by the policies and procedures of your workplace? This is a question that often trips people up because they may quickly answer, well, yes, I do. You know, I have to be in by 9 o'clock or I have to be in by 10 o'clock and whatever the case might be. And I think it's important to understand as independent contractors that you don't abide by the policies and procedures of your workplace. You have your own policies and procedures that mirror those of your end client. And just like if a painter were to show up at your house at 3 in the morning to paint your house, he'd be fired. And just like that, you as an independent contractor, if you went to work at 3 in the morning instead of showing up at the core hours that are consistent with your client's business, that you would be fired very quickly. So you have policies and procedures that do mirror those of your end clients so that you can be an effective independent contractor. And this is really about making sure that you understand the areas that you can effectively put your foot in your mouth and put yourself in hot water with CRA. And language and literature around this topic is very, very important, which is why it's critical that you work with people who are knowledgeable and experienced in this issue. So make sure if you are preparing your taxes that you're working with an accountant who's knowledgeable on the topic. If, God forbid, this has gone to a reassessment and has gone to tax court, that you're working with a tax lawyer who knows and understands the issue, who has fought cases already, and most importantly, has won cases already. And there are, like I say, lawyers and accountants who are very knowledgeable, always happy to give a referral for anyone who has any questions about that. Now we're going to jump into personal service business risk. And first I'm going to start with a definition of personal service business risk. Personal service business risk is different from employee versus independent contractor. First of all, the reason it's different is because a personal service business is a type of legal entity. It is a type of corporation. Employee versus independent contractor can be applied against someone who's working through a corporation or someone who is working as a sole proprietor. One of the misconceptions out there was that if you worked as a sole proprietor, you could not be assessed as a personal service corporation or personal service business. Technically true, because a sole proprietor is not an incorporated entity, so that can't be a personal service business. However, it can be deemed to be an employee, and it can lose all the ability to deduct its expenses and be dealing with interest and penalties, and be just as punitive as a personal, or very punitive, much like a personal service business. So this definition comes from the Income Tax Act. And, you know, I'm not going to read the whole thing for you guys right here because I'm pretty sure you can all read. Many of you might have even read it already. But I think that the most important thing is, you know, this paragraph that says a person or a partnership to whom or which the services were provided, but for the existence of the corporation, and I'm going to, could be reasonably regarded as, I'm not even reading, I'm just going from memory here because I got lost, could be reasonably regarded as an employee of the corporation, of the payer. There are some exceptions here where it talks about whether they had more than 5 employees, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Unfortunately, the reality is very few independent contractors have 5 or more full-time employees, which makes that aspect of a way of skirting around the issue null and void. And like I say, if you adequately protect yourself and you do a little bit of foresight and planning, you really shouldn't be at risk as being deemed as a personal service business. We're going to talk a little bit about the risk here once my computer catches up to me. Now, the current climate for PSB, PSC is actually pretty good outside of this Bill 148 situation, at least compared to past periods. At one point, it was arguably the biggest threat facing incorporated independent consultants or IT consultants. The CRA was looking for PSCs, or personal service businesses, where they could prove that the contractor is not a true independent business. They did a special project. Out of that special project, they reassessed a number of individuals and then went after them for interest and penalties. Now, the impact for these individuals was quite high, because what happens when you are reassessed is they're going to deny the majority of your expenses. They're going to then say that any money left inside your corporation is not eligible for the small business tax rate. It is taxed at a much higher rate. And they're going to look at a multitude of years, and they're going to reassess interest and penalties. So it's not uncommon for reassessments to be in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars when someone is assessed as a personal service business. So the impact to the individual is quite high. However, when we look statistically at how many people have been deemed to be personal service businesses, the risk is actually quite low. It's a very small percentage of the population. Even when they did the special project, we were talking about hundreds of people, not thousands of people that were reassessed. And even within that, the NACCB did a lot of work to help defend a number of these cases. And in fact, the lawyers that worked on the NACCB cases fought and won every single case that they defended. Now, unfortunately, many of those cases in that special project were what they call a consent to judgment, which basically means that they didn't go to court. They were effectively settled out of court, which means that there's no jurisprudence that other accountants and other lawyers can look to and say, hey, look, here's proof why these independent contractors are not personal service businesses. And they use in tools like our tax foresight and employment foresight tools that we use to be able to assess. And unfortunately, CRA is a little bit like a bully sometimes. They fight the cases that they know they can win, and they settle the cases that they don't believe they can win. So historically, a lot of cases around personal service business at task court levels were often lost by independent contractors. We're starting to turn that around. We're starting to get some more momentum where we're winning at the early stages. But even those cases that were won at task court level were often then later overturned in appeals. And there's been great success record. We'll talk more about our proprietary document that goes through all the different case law and points out why our clients are not independent contractors, as well as the new tax foresight and employment foresight tools that we use to search the entire database to point to other cases similar to the situation that you might be facing that show why you're not an independent contractor, because that is really a lot of what the course has based their decisions on is previous pre-existing cases or jurisprudence. So big point about personal service business and what that is the impact on the individual can be quite high, but the risk is still relatively low. And the analogy that I've used many times, and people have heard it, if you've ever heard me talk, you've heard me say it, that personal service business is much like a shark attack. When it impacts someone, it's vicious, it's atrocious, but the amount of people that it impacts is quite small. And we shouldn't let the news and the impact that we hear in media deter us from enjoying the bounties of independent contracting or the beauty of the ocean. So I think that there's a very great analogy there to help you recognize that, yes, you should do some planning, some foresight, so that you're not taking unnecessary risks. If there's a sign at the beach that says, beware of sharks, maybe it's not the time to go swimming. Just like in the independent contracting world, if you're doing things that are putting yourself at risk, you should either look at changing your situation or maybe even taking on a new role. So again, happy to talk more about that as we go. I'd like to also give you some background on PSB, PSC. The first sort of landmark cases are the Weeby-Dorr and the Sagaz case. And I think that the four major criteria that are still used today came out of the Weeby-Dorr case back in 1986. So this is not a new issue. And even the stuff that we're talking about here, PSB, PSC, is definitely a tax issue, not an employment law issue. But even employment law is looking at these same sort of areas of control, and that's degree of supervision and control, which we talked about earlier as being an important aspect. Ownership of tools. Now, this is an area that's still used today. However, it's important to know and understand that the tools an independent contractor has aren't necessarily his computer that he's using, but it's often considered in most court cases to be the knowledge that you're bringing to the table. So still an important part and still used today, just not maybe in the way that you might think of it. Risk for profit and loss is a very important issue that is still used today, as is integral part of the process. And we're going to talk about, again, some of the tools that we can use to help mitigate your risk on this. And, you know, risk for profit or loss, one of the great things, and I'm going to say it a couple of times today, is insurance. If you have insurance, the definition of insurance is you're insuring against a risk. So we think that goes a long way for demonstrating that there is a risk for profit or loss. Now, we've talked a lot about personal service business, which is, as we said, it's been going back to the 80s. It's not a new issue. What is new is Bill 148. And most people have heard of Bill 148, but not because of employer versus independent contractor. They've heard of it around minimum wage. It got a lot of publicity around its changes to minimum wage. What Bill 148 was a change to the Employment Standards Act and the Labor Relations Act, and the Labor Relations Act. The reason that it has had an impact on the independent contracting community is that there's some clauses in there that do affect the independent contractor market. Most importantly, we've got section 5.11, which says an employer shall not treat for the purposes of this act a person who is an employee of the employer as if the person were not an employee under the act. So this is talking about employee versus independent contractor. In addition to this, they've actually put some teeth into the penalties for the employers. And so the penalties are up to $50,000 per independent contractor who is wrongfully deemed to be an independent contractor that the ESA investigator has deemed to be an employee. Now, this is going back to November of last year when Bill 148 reached royal ascension. So it's been around for a while. Now, anecdotally, we've seen a pause, at least I've seen a bit of a pause in the market. I don't know if any of the agencies have seen this. There was a period of time where I know a lot of agencies were reaching out to me trying to figure out how they were going to deal with this impact of Bill 148 and what it meant for their existing contractors that they had out on market, and any new contractors that they had. And I think that basically the result and what most agencies have chosen to do is to do an assessment of every one of their independent contractors to determine their reasonableness. Now, this has been something that's been used in the States before. Now, unfortunately, the States has gone the route of a way that's basically virtually eliminated the independent contracting environment, which is a shame because independent contracting is a necessity for businesses, the contingent workforce. There's a lot of reasons that that's important. I'm not going to get up on a soapbox today and talk about why it's important. But one of the things that we're having to do right now to ensure that you can continue to work as an independent contractor is go through an assessment so that you can demonstrate to the employer, you can demonstrate to the agency that you're going with that you truly are independent. Because if the agencies don't feel comfortable that you are an independent contractor and that they can demonstrate and prove that you're not an independent contractor, they're just not going to place you, or the end client's not going to hire you. So while the penalties are being assessed and levied on the employers and the agencies, it is still very much an issue for the independent contractors themselves. And it is important for you to go out and be able to demonstrate that you are an independent contractor. So this is as important as your resume, in my opinion, is having documentation to demonstrate that you are an independent contractor. And what we've gone through is we've done a lot of work to prepare tools for our client base and for recruiters that we work with to be able to provide that confidence so that they can know that they can place you as an independent contractor with confidence. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing to minimize risk around personal service business. And then we'll talk a little bit also about what we're doing to minimize risk around employee versus employment law, employee versus independent contractor on the Bill 148 or ESA side of things. So obviously we've been dealing with PSB, PSC for a very long time. And since 1984, we've been working on this issue. We were one of the first accounting firms to believe that independent contractors could incorporate and take advantage of the small business deduction. So we've been dealing with this for a very long time. And back in the 80s, many of the other accounting firms were actually turning away these independent contractors and believing that they weren't eligible for the small business deduction and couldn't make use of that. Today, it's a strategy used by the big four firms, by accountants all across the country. It is an accepted strategy. However, it is still important to make sure that we're not walking away thinking we're getting away with a wink and a nod and cheating the system. It's important to make sure that if you're working as an independent contractor, you understand what makes you an independent contractor, so that if you are ever challenged, you can stand up for your rights and defend that. And you need to look and act like a business. So it's not just enough to look like a business. You do truly need to act like a business if you wanted to be treated like a business. But as I said, we've been doing this for decades now, and we've fought and won all of our major PSC cases. We have never actually lost a case in our history of dealing with this. Again, it is important to recognize, though, that it is still, the impact is huge. The number of cases are small. We've dealt with, I would say, probably, tens to hundreds of these cases over the 30 years. It's still a very small percentage of the number of audits that are out there, and it's a very, very small percentage of the entire market. So you don't have to be afraid. Things that you can do to ensure you're not a PSB is, as we said earlier, is you can have more than 5 employees. This is a funny little clause that came out of one particular case, which was, I believe he was an Argonaut, or was a CFL player who was using a small business deduction to shelter and reduce his income. He had on salary himself, his wife, and his 2 kids. Out of that case, they said, well, if you have to have more than 5 employees. It's somewhat random and subjective. I don't know very many true businesses that start day one with 5 full-time employees, let alone any independent contractors. There are some strategies out west that are used by people. I'm not really going to comment on how effective those are or not, to amalgamate many IT contractors into effectively a consortium and use this as a tool to bypass that. My personal thought is that is overkill. Like I said, we have a very, very good track record defending our clients using traditional strategies. In addition, in my experience in dealing with CRA, is just like in that original case where they shut down a loophole by basically saying, well, you have to have more than 5 employees. I think that they will just come back and shut down this loophole once it gains enough momentum. So I don't think that that's a long-term solution. Now, that's just my own thoughts on it. I'm not saying that that's reality or there's any published information on it. That's just my gut feel based on my experience with what I've seen CRA do in the past. So specific measurable things that you can do to help minimize personal service business risk is make sure that you have a strong and clearly worded written contract. This is far more important on personal service business side than it is on employment side, but still used on both sides of the table. It really is important. Make sure that the work relationship conduct must support the contract. Again, many times when we talk about work relationship and conduct, this relates more around language than actually what you're doing, and making sure that you're using the right language and that you're understanding like, for example, that you have your own policies and procedures, not that you abide by the policies and procedures of your end client. Limiting contract length is definitely a good tool for demonstrating that there's risk for profit or loss. An important thing to know and understand is that no one case has ever been won or lost based on tenure. And again, with personal service business and employment law, they're looking at all the factors combined. There's no one individual factor that makes you a PSB or not a PSB, other than what we talked about earlier, which is the idea of having more than 5 full-time employees. Another great thing that you can do is to diversify your client base. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Again, important to know and understand that if you have a few small clients and one major client, the CRA will again sort of look through that and say, and potentially assess you as maybe still being an employee of that one major client, even if you do have other small clients. So what we mean by diversifying your client base is more of an equal, balanced load amongst multiple clients. You might have one larger client, but it's not, you're not dependent on that. Implement asset protection strategies. So there's a number of strategies that we use here. One of the most common is setting up holding companies. And these are ways to ensure that if you are ever reassessed and lose your cases, God forbid, that the assets and the wealth that you've accumulated over time are protected and sheltered. And there are ways to do that, and we talk a bit about that. Controlling your work and the process. Again, we talked earlier about the idea of control of the outcome versus control of the work. It is important that you are controlling your work, and that's an important factor. Again, we talked earlier about the importance of liability insurance because this demonstrates risk for profit or loss again. So that is really important. The other thing that we're seeing is more and more important on both sides of the table, again, employment law versus tax law, is having that professional profile. And it's actually an area you can really get hung out to dry. Because if you have a LinkedIn profile that's, saying that you are a project manager at XYZ Corporation rather than an independent contractor who is doing project management at XYZ company, you're in effect putting yourself at risk. So you want to make sure that your business presence represents you as an independent contractor. That includes your social media channels. Ideally, you should have a website that, even if it's just, professional profile website, you should have a website that demonstrates the services that you provide as an independent contractor. We also strongly believe that your company's name should reflect your services, even if it's Andrew Wall Consulting. That's far better than a numbered company. All of our incorporation packages do include a name search, so it's built into the pricing for everyone we do. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish and use a numbered company. In addition, one of the things, if sometimes people are concerned about wanting to do multiple lines of business, maybe they want to do some consulting and they also want to sell some products online, you can actually set up a different operating name, so you can have multiple operating names, multiple bank accounts for the same corporation. So don't let that be an excuse to use a numbered company. Not a big fan of numbered companies at all, because businesses don't do business with numbered companies, they do businesses with other businesses. And lastly, probably most importantly, hire experienced professionals to represent you. One of the most notable cases was a case called the Gomez case. It was actually a guy who worked at CRA. But interesting fact here is that CRA is one of the largest employers of independent contractors in Canada. So that's an interesting fact. But he was an independent contractor at CRA. He was assessed as a personal service business. He chose to represent himself. I'm pretty sure you can guess what the outcome of that case was. He lost that case. I'm not aware as to whether it's actually gone through appeals yet, but he lost it at the tax court levels. And again, if you don't have the knowledge, if you don't have the experience, it's really easy to trip over your own feet, say things unintentionally that will deem you to be a personal service business or an employee. So make sure that you're dealing with a knowledgeable representative and you're getting sound advice from people with experience. Oh, sorry. One last thing before we go into EFA is some of the unique tools that we do offer our client base. So as we mentioned earlier, we've got our audit representation protection, so that if you are assessed, we're here to represent you at no additional cost to you, to know that you have that knowledgeable resource available to you, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to defend this issue. We also have a proprietary 76-page response to CRA that outlines all the case history that we've seen in the past in favor of independent contracting. And we slap that on the desk of most CRA auditors, and in many situations, that in and of itself is enough to send them away and confident that our clients are not personal service businesses. We also had a sample response to the CRA questionnaire that was put out by that special project that went on a few years back. We've also now got a new tax foresight and employment foresight tool that allows us to use artificial intelligence to search tax and legal libraries for similar court cases, to tell you and give you a percentage chance of probability that we think we will win, as well as all the court cases and course law that are specifically relevant. It also even gives you some sample questions. What would happen? It allows you to do some, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here, some variance analysis, I guess is what I'm looking for, to test what are the areas where you're at risk, so that you can know if you change this one thing, you've got a, now you've got an 80% chance of being assessed as an independent contractor instead of a 54% chance of winning that case. So it is a very useful, very powerful tool. Costs us a couple bucks to get it, and we are offering that service to the community for free, because we think it's so important that people have the information at hand to know that they are free from that risk, whether it's just for peace of mind for themselves so that they can sleep at night and not worry about CRA come knocking at that door, or if it's to help them make sure that they can get and keep that next contract with their end client, because they've been able to make their end client and the agency feel confident that they are truly working with an independent contractor. We are also working with a few agencies right now as an independent third party to help them go through this risk assessment, to again backlog their existing client database to make sure that they are truly independent. If you are an agency and you're interested in doing a program like that, again, please do feel free to reach out to me. So minimizing risk around ESA. Again, it's very similar to the tax law. They're looking at the control test. They're looking at the ownership of tools test. They're looking at the chance of profit or loss. They're looking at the integration test. But a few other areas, that are important are also the detailed written contract, the business presence, and the contractor conduct are three areas in employment law that are treated a little bit differently than they are in the tax law. And it's important to know and understand that historically, we've been very successful on the tax law side. The employment law side has been a little bit more stringent. They tend to err more in favor. There's more cases where people are deemed to be employees than there are where they're deemed to be independent contractors. That's different in tax law. We've actually been able to win more cases to show that people are independent contractors than they've been able to win showing that they're personal service businesses or employees. So that's important to know and understand. And this is why Bill 148 is so critical and so important, because it could have very dire impacts on the independent contracting community as a whole. So we want to make sure that the agencies, the end clients, and the independent contractors all feel safe and comfortable to continue working as independent contractors and to continue to enable this contingent workforce, which is so important for our Canadian economy. So again, some of the ways that you can maintain that contractor status when it comes to intent is that contract for independence. It's around those control issues and making sure that you understand the language of what constitutes control, and that the employer is controlling the outcome, not the process. Having a business presence, make sure that you've got that website. The risk for profit or loss, again, making sure that you have you've got insurance to help demonstrate that there is a risk for profit or loss. Again, if we can limit contract lengths, that's important too. The other thing that we also always say is don't let the tax tail wag the dog, or in this case, maybe Bill 148 tail wag the dog. If you've got great opportunities and great contracts that are longer than 6 months, it doesn't mean you should turn those down. It just means that you might want to be stronger in other areas, because when judges, when inspectors, when CRA agents look at your situation, they are looking at the cumulative effect, not one particular issue. As I've said earlier, there's not one item that we talk about today that in and of itself can be used to determine you as a personal service business or an employee. It is the sum of the whole part. So again, a little bit about our new reasonableness assessment, our foresight tool as we're calling it. We are providing it to all of our own clients. We are in the process of rolling that out now. We are also making it available to all NACCB members. It's also available for all attendees of this webinar. As I've said earlier, there is currently no charge for this program. We are rolling it out as a way to help protect the industry. We are looking at maybe tailoring this program a little bit to see if we can add in some guarantees. If we are able to do that, the reality is there will be some significant cost for us to be able to generate those guarantees. And with that will be that we will probably turn this from a free program into a paid program. So get it while it's hot, people, and log in, get your assessment, and go through that and do that. One of the important things is to note is that we have changed our assessment now 3 times. So we first did our assessment. We were, I think, the first people to launch an assessment tool with the help of a number of agencies who, provide us feedback and input, and assessment tools that have been used in the States. And we built off of that. Sorry, let me ignore that. And then after we had the presentation from Hicks Morley at the NACCB AGM meeting, we revised again to use the Hicks Morley one, which I think is very good. Unfortunately, it doesn't use artificial intelligence to be able to search the databases. In addition, the feedback that we got on the Hicks Morley one, which was very thorough, was that the independent contractors, many of them felt it was invasive. We were asking for a lot of information to be provided to us, copies of contracts, copies of articles of incorporation, copies of insurance, basically a whole slew of information. This new assessment tool is not asking for nearly as much information. We can dive into what the assessment tool looks like. I do have it open in Google. This is what it is here. So we've got a number of questions. There are 6 sections. We've got about, this first section is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions. So, I think it's no more than 30 questions to go through. We are not asking you to provide any additional information. Again, when we look at the outcome of these, and it's important to note that this link right now that I'm sharing here is a link to the Employment Foresight tool, which is the tool we're using for Bill 148. We do also have a Tax Foresight tool, which we are using for personal service business. Questions are similar, but they are different. If you want assessment on PSB, PSC, make sure that you use the correct form for that. If you want one for employment law, you can use that. I'll also just show you, in case you're wondering how to find the ones for tax, where you can find those. So for those of you who are familiar with our website, it's cpa4it.ca. This has recently changed. The old domain was ca4it.ca. We've got a new website here. And in fact, we've got a whole new company, to be honest, because CAs no longer exist. CPAs are the new designation of choice. In addition, as many of you know, my father founded the original organization I'm now taking over, and CPA4IT is the new structure where we're doing this M&A. So under our resources section here, you will find links to a number of the tools that we offer free to our client base. So we've got a pyramid of power, a whole bunch of frequently asked questions, our personal service business risk assessment, and the employee versus independent contractor assessment. We've also got some guides on here about cloud accounting. So lots of great information available on our website. Please do check it out. Give us your feedback. If we can make it better, we're always looking to constantly and never-endingly improve. So please do give us our feedback on these tools and let us know how we can improve, and we can make your life easier as independent contractors and your lives easier as agencies. Now we do have about 9 minutes left. I will again close by just saying that good advice is priceless. Reiterating the point that you work with a professional that's experienced, someone that takes the time to educate you, that asks the right questions, and most importantly, that you can understand. These are complicated issues. We do our best to express them in as simple terms as possible, but make sure it's still got enough technical information around it. Again, we can always do better. If you've got feedback on how we can make this presentation more impactful, more useful for the community, please do share your feedback with us. We really do appreciate it. And if you need a referral for a lawyer, we're happy to make it. If you need a referral for an accountant, we're probably going to refer ourselves. But again, if we're not able to help you or serve you for whatever reason, I actually have built up quite a large network of other accountants and bookkeepers, not only in Canada, but in Canada, the United States, Australia, and the UK, through my experience in the Pro Advisor network with Intuit. So always happy to make a referral if we're not the right fit, and happy to help in any way. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up, like I say, for questions. I will ask if you've got questions that you use either the Q&A or the chat section to post your questions. And I'll leave it up. We've got, like I said, about another 8 minutes. I know we're going to tad long here, but we'll leave it open for about another 8 minutes if anyone's got any questions. So thoughts, questions? I always get nervous when there's no questions. It means I've either done an outstanding job or I've done a really bad job. Hopefully it's just technical issues. People aren't sure how to post their questions. Because I still see a lot of you are still dialed in. Still got 11 participants on the call right now. However, we're not rolling through any questions. I'll give it just a few more minutes in case people are still struggling to figure out. If you feel confident, you've got all the answers, great. If you are would rather ask these questions at another time offline, again, you've got our contact information up here. So you can find us online at cpa4it.ca. You can reach us at our toll-free number at 1-800-465-7532. The email address for the organization is customerservice@cpa4it. Oh, we do have some Q&As. Look at this. I knew it would be worthwhile. So we've got 3 questions here, so bear with us, everyone. I'm going to start with Pat's. Could you explain what a PSB is again? I'm still a little confused. So a personal service business is a type of corporation that CRA has said, but for the corporation, you'd be reasonably regarded as an employee of your major client or your end client. So this is basically, they're saying that you're working as a corporation, but they don't believe that you are truly an independent contractor. They think that you're acting more in the way of an employee. So again, similar to employee versus independent contractor, just specific to corporations. It is a type of legal structure. So in the past, one of the things is a corporation for a period of time, like we're going back to the 90s now, if you incorporated, that was like the safe haven. Like once you were incorporated, you were pretty much left alone. That went away when they came around PSB, PSCs, and basically said, even if you're incorporated, you could still be deemed effectively an employee. Now, you're not deemed an employee, but basically what they do is they deny all your expenses, and they say that the personal service business has what I call a punitive tax rate. It's a substantially higher tax rate than the small business deduction, which actually is worse than if all that income were considered that as employment income. So that is, hopefully, I've answered your question. So Pat, please do let me know if I've answered your question. Can you download the presentation? I'm assuming you mean the PowerPoint deck. Yeah, we'll make it available for you. Glad to hear it, Pat. So we will make the PowerPoint deck available for you if that's what you're looking for. This session has also been recorded in the past. The reality is with me, the way I talk, I'm not scripted, as you can probably tell by the ums and ahs. So we have done the sessions last, very similar ones. They're recorded, they're up in social media because we stream them live on Facebook. So check out our Facebook page to find copies of the video if you want that and want to reuse that. We will probably, I have been recording this session. I'll probably put it up to YouTube as well, although we didn't stream live over social today. Glad to hear I answered. I guess that was the third question. The third question was thanks. So you're most welcome. So I think we've gotten to those two questions that we've got. Again, please, if you've got more questions, can I recommend a good way to create a contract? So my number one recommendation for a contract is going through an agency. The advantage of going through an agency is they have contracts that have been vetted by lawyers and accountants to ensure that they're minimizing risk for a number of factors. One of the other things is the NACCB has available to its members a sample contract that we could probably download and get for you. It's, again, intended to be through a staffing agency, so it may not be I wouldn't use that verbatim, but it might be a good place to start as a starting point. I would say that the most important thing is that if you are going to be doing you're going to be doing your contract yourself, you really should invest the money to have it reviewed by a lawyer and an accountant to make sure. The lawyer's going to make sure that there's no legal issues, and an accountant can look at it see if there's any personal service business issues or tax issues. Or you could get a tax lawyer to try and do both. That might also work, but make sure that you're seeking out a professional. So hopefully did that answer your question again, Pat? Let's see. We've got another question here. So I did answer Pat's question, which is great. If you don't have access to Facebook, is there a way for you to get a copy or download? I'm assuming you're talking about the video. I'll make sure I'll ask Rachel, my colleague, to send a link to the PowerPoint deck. I'll put it up on SlideShare, and we'll send a link to the attendees, a copy of the slide deck to the attendees there. If you're talking specifically the video, if you don't have Facebook, it is also available on YouTube as well. So check our YouTube channel. Just Google or just YouTube CPA4IT, and we should come up. Again, I will ask my colleague to try and include a link to one of the pre-recorded sessions in that. So we'll do a follow-up email to all the attendees with links to the survey, links to previous recordings, and links to the slide deck. And any other questions? Great. It looks like we're literally like almost to the minute on time. So thank you guys for taking the time out of your lunch, taking your lunch break with me. Again, please do share your feedback. We'd love to hear how we're doing. If you found this useful, again, or valuable, we love to hear positive Google reviews. Those go a long way for helping our social media cred. So we could always use help on that aspect. Of course, reach out anytime. So thanks, everyone. Bye for now. Oh. Glad we were able to help out, Pat. Have a great one. Bye for now.